Good morning, everybody. We'll just be getting started in a moment. Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on our session around what is an IT strategy and a guide to getting it right. So before we get started and go into a bit more detail, just some webinar etiquette, just to say that this session is being recorded and it will be available on demand on the website afterwards. As you will see, there's a Q&A box, and this is for questions. We really do encourage as many questions as possible. You know, we want this to be an interactive and useful session for everybody. So please do put the questions into the Q&A box, and we have a dedicated slot for questions at the end, but we'll also be keeping an eye on them throughout. You'll also see there's a chat box, and this is for any more technical questions or support questions or sort of general queries. And my lovely colleague Rebecca is in the background, and she will be keeping an eye on that. So I'm Joyce Harman. I'm Senior Client Relationship Manager at Hart Square, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined this morning by my colleague Rhys Evans. Rhys, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Morning, Joyce. Hi, I'm Rhys Evans. So yeah, I'm the Head of Technology Services at Hart Square. Just a little bit of kind of sort of background on me. I'm one of the more technical people at Hart Square. We're kind of drawn from quite a few different backgrounds from across the NFP sector. So some people have marketing backgrounds, some people have more experience in kind of running supporter services. But I'm originally a computer science graduate, started as a developer, and then moved into working as an analyst, and then head of technology at the Football Foundation, which is a sports charity that gives out funding to grassroots football. That's where I started doing quite a few kind of systems implementations and digital change projects, and then went on to have kind of PM roles at the British Museum and Christian Aid. And then since 2014, I've been with Hart Square. So I've done various different projects with organisations such as Mind, Royal Society of Medicine, Cycling UK, the Bar Council. So yeah, no, it's been an interesting period of time working for Hart Square.
Perfect, thanks, Rhys. And as you can see, you can tell why we've asked him to join us today. It was that fantastic experience. So looking forward to getting to the interview to pick his brain. So please do put in plenty of questions for him.
Yeah, please do.
So for those of you who are not aware of Hart Square, just to say that we are a consultancy practice and we work only in the not-for-profit sector, and that we are independent, you know, so we know lots of technology partners very, very well, but any of the work and recommendations that we do are based solely on our client needs and nothing else. So I wanted to run a quick poll, if you bear with me while I bring this up. And the poll is asking, what stages are you at in doing an IT strategy or review at your organization? So are you still deciding, looking for some tips of best practice? Are you just getting started? Are you in the middle of it? Or have you completed it and you're kind of thinking about what next steps could be? So I'm just going to give this a few more seconds. It's quite interesting at the minute. There's quite an even split. So just bear with me. Okay. So I'm going to, oh no, it's all changing again. Right, I'm going to end poll and share those results. So interesting that the biggest one I think for today is just getting started, which I suppose going on the topic of today's webinar makes sense. Quite a few, 25% are looking for, you know, tips and best practice, few in the middle of it, and actually 25% have completed and are seeking next steps. So Rhys, I think that'll be interesting when we come to our conversation later, that we've kind of got everybody at all of the different stages, so we will bear that in mind. So let me just stop sharing. So before we move over to sort of getting into a bit more interview with Rhys, I just wanted to talk through sort of some of the key questions and the key things that come up a lot when we're talking to clients. And the biggest one is always, you know, where do I start? Which can be across the board, not just for IT strategies, but just generally anything to do with sort of review projects. And for different organizations have different priorities, have different challenges. It might be that actually you're looking at a data review because your data is siloed, it's across a number of different systems, nothing is connected. It's very difficult to do reports and analysis, or even it might be that, you know, you can do the reports and analysis, but people don't trust the data. So this is really driving part of this review, is kind of looking at the systems that you have in place, where the data is held and how you're managing that. But it also might be that then, as kind of uncovering a part of that data review, you're actually saying, okay, let's looking at what all the systems that we have in place. And then you're identifying things like, well, actually, we've got a number of different technologies. Some of them are duplicate. You might have you know, 2 different payment gateways. You might have 3 different collaboration tools. You know, this very often what happens is when you look at the different tech that you're using, the different tech and tools that you're using, that actually there's duplicate, and then that has a real impact on your budget, on your IT spend, but also your IT technical debt. And for some organizations, and a client I was speaking with yesterday, when we did a review of looking at all of the different tools that they had in place, it was really quite frightening, the number of, shall we say, pieces of kit that they had, with an awful lot of duplicates, and they really couldn't get a true understanding of what their IT spend was. So that, you know, can be a big driver. Or it might be that you're having issues around, you know, collaboration and communication, that, you know, you're struggling with sharing files. It might be that, you know, there's no central repository for this. There's access issues. Dare I say, my MD would, you know, feign in horror if I said sharing things as attachments on emails. You know, what is it that you're trying to do around collaboration and communication? Do you have the tools? What is it that you're trying to achieve? So the main point in this really is, it's, you know, there's lots of different things and areas, as you can see in this slide, that you could look at, but it's very rare that there will be one issue that's going to be held in isolation, because very often they're all going to be interlinked, and it's very much about taking that approach when you're thinking about an IT strategy. So as a sort of you know, a starting point, and Andres is going to go into this in a bit more detail later, but we kind of think if you break this into 3 different areas, and might sound very obvious, but, you know, first of all, you know, the vision. You know, what is it you're trying to do as an organization? What is it you want to be as an organization? But thinking around the IT strategy project, why are you doing this project? What is the ultimate goal of where you're trying to get to, and what it is that you want to achieve? Being very clear so everyone's on the same page of what it is that you're trying to do. The driving forces, why are you doing this? You know, what has been the, you know, what has been the thing or things that have brought this to a head now? So it might be, you know, staff saying, my laptop crashes every time I go on to Teams or Zoom, or it might be that I can't run reports. I need to, you know, so therefore I can't report up to senior management. It takes me hours to do anything. It might be that I'm getting no support from the help desk with any of my challenges. There might be many different things, but understanding of what is it that's driving you to do this review project now. And then the resisting forces, what is stopping, you know, change happening? What is stopping things working the way they should? You know, sort of what are the barriers really around this? So when you're thinking about your project, if you sort of think of it into those 3 areas, it can help you sort of construct, you know, a good starting point really for doing the project. So around the vision, these are just some examples of, you know, when we talk to clients about the sort of visions that they have around IT strategy. They're many and varied, because every organization is many and varied. But the important point on this is that you must be agreed on what the vision is. If you're not all agreed and you don't have alignment, you'll never get the outcome that you want. So it might be things like you want to have digital capabilities that are across the organization and not just in one department. Very often it can be that any of the real digital capabilities just fall within, say, for example, the marketing team and not the rest of the organization. It might be that you want to be able to enable using your data better to give, you know, better decisions, to make better insights on what's happening either with fundraising or with your members, so that you can make informed decisions as an organization about your priorities, your strategic goals, and all of those kind of things. You might want a new approach to how you do projects. Very often we talk to clients who have, you know, tried numbers of IT strategy projects or changing of systems, and there's been a lot of challenges on it. So you might want to to look at, lessons learned from them, to look at new approaches for the projects. It might be, to my point earlier about that, you want to rationalize down the number of systems, tools that you have, because your IT spend is getting out of control. And it's also, with the rationalizing down your systems, it's not just also the IT spend, but it's also those systems need to be managed, they need to be maintained, so there is an awful lot of overhead. And also then finally, it might be that you currently outsource a lot of services, or you might be that you want to bring them back in, or vice versa. So being very clear about what your vision is and what it is that you're trying to do. So Rhys, I was going to bring you in if you to talk a bit more about sort of the driving forces and the resisting forces.
Sure, no problem. So, I mean, this is an example that's anonymized from a real world example, and I mean, the reason we use this tool, it's a kind of a change management tool, and that's probably where it's had where it's most often referenced. But quite often, the trigger for IT strategies or can be, we see the bad ones, which are just a lumping together of various different projects that have come up from different parties, and then they're kind of effectively put together and said, well, this is an IT strategy. And I think if that happens, you're not necessarily kind of taking a broader view. It's not a holistic view of what the organization needs. So we use this as a tool to sit down with the kind of senior leadership team, who were non-technical. They had very little IT in-house knowledge. They had some the trigger points were really there's a bit of change in some of the leadership, a recognition that there were one or two things that had gone on that meant that their current IT provider probably wasn't right for them. But rather than kind of dive into those issues, we said, we'll take a step back and let's talk about overall what's the future of your organization and how it brings technology into the conversations it has on a day-to-day basis. So first thing we did was, as Joyce has talked to, we started to talk about, well, what's your vision? Looking forward at the organization that you want to be in 5 years. What's the kind of signature of technology in there? How do you want it to be used? And this is the middle one were things that we kind of came to as a group, or we as Hart Square kind of facilitated as a discussion, which is projects being properly commissioned, well run, very kind of well aligned to benefits, a general culture of being more open-minded. I think they're kind of trying to move out of a phase of people being a little bit scared of technology, which is a really common situation. Using data better, making the best of digital tools, and really a lot of that was trying to bring people into a situation where they felt comfortable about saying, I'm doing something new. I would think there is a possibility of doing it better by applying a tool, some work with a partner, there's a digital potential in here that we want to talk about, but we don't know about it. How are we going to actually kind of turn that into a project and move it forward? And the driving forces were the things that were really, sending them towards that goal that they knew of. The way that we actually facilitated it is that people kind of threw it out in the chat in a team session, and then we started grouping them together. So it was very much people off the top of their heads, and then we actually started to kind of form a picture from that. And for this one, you can see that there's a recognition, there's quite a lot of external forces saying, we're looking at you and we think your digital presence and your kind of IT isn't good enough. Your peers are doing better, and that obviously is a driver. There was a driver to that they knew that there were better ways of working, and their staff, particularly staff who have come in from other organizations, were aware that they'd seen other environments where they were doing the same things, but they were using better approaches, techniques, processes, better access to skills. And they also recognized that they already started doing some things that if they leveraged them well, they would help push them forward. And on the right hand side, it was the things where being, just trying to boost their level of self-awareness, the things that they knew were traps that they could fall into, or things that were going to hold them back. They had kind of effectively kind of an IT training debt in the organization. There were a lot of people who weren't comfortable, weren't familiar on some of the basic skills, and to get them involved with some of these more advanced digital conversations, they'd need to they'd need to address that. They knew there were some people who weren't keen on the idea of technology change. They knew that there was going to be a budget implication and they're going to have to make a credible case to trustees. And yeah, they knew that there were things that they didn't know and they needed some input from third parties. So the idea is that if you bring it out as a kind of a top level kind of holistic picture, that's not the only perspective, but it gives you a starting point as to where you can actually start to understand what things you might need to kind of work on and tweak as you go along.
Perfect, thank you. I think you've had a little visitor to come in to say hi. I think they would come and join us.
She has strong opinions on IT, so she drops in like that.
Starting her early, absolutely. Thanks for that, Rhys. And I think also we've had some great questions come in already, which is fantastic. So I'll be pinging them to you in a minute. So just really wanted to talk then around sort of gap analysis, an action that you can carry out fairly early on. And really the purpose of this is understanding, what is the desired state that you want to get to versus that your current state. So what you're trying to do is uncover, what are the gaps in the systems that you have? Is it that actually people are trying to do things, but there isn't any systems or tools in order that they can use to do it, and then therefore they're making up their own workarounds? Dare I say they're using spreadsheets and keeping them in secret places? Is there, what challenges, what problems that our people are having? And back to that sort of first slide where we were talking about where should I start? That, the point is that you have to take a holistic view to this, and absolutely to Rhys's point on the previous slide, you can't look at this in silos. You have to look at the wider picture. So you should look across all of these areas. It's really, really important that if you're going to have a cohesive IT strategy, that you have looked at all of the different areas. Some areas you might look in less details than others, that's absolutely fine, but it's about doing that more general review. And then finally on this is really about obtaining buy-in. So as any of you that have been on any previous webinars, you know that I will always say that it's all about the people, and it absolutely is, because you need to bring people along on the journey of why you're doing this. And to Rhys's point around, people have different opinions, people have different sort of gripes or challenges or things that are driving them crazy. If you don't go out and ask people how they're using technology, what are the problems that they're having, what are the issues that they're having, also looking for positives as well, it's not all about the negatives, but that it's about going out, having those conversations, getting that information so that you're actually making informed decisions, and it's not just based on a little bit of hearsay. Also, it's really useful when you're putting together your, the strategy and then, speaking to the senior management team or boards of trustees, whatever it is, that actually it's a really good idea to bring in some quotes from, the survey, from the conversations that you've had. It really, really reinforces the point of what the challenges are, and to give that, this is true, and this is, you don't name the person, but you can either say it was this department or not, or just name the people. And then the really important point is, done off the back of that, is that you're developing your plan for action against each of the issues. And that, again, you're communicating back to people that this is the plan, this is what we're going to do. Because you can spend a lot of time and money doing an IT strategy, and you can spend a lot of time and money making changes to your IT estate and your IT in general. But if people haven't bought into it, you can end up with new shiny systems and tech that people won't use. And then you're kind of back to square one. So now I'm going to bring Rhys in, and as I say, we've had lots of questions coming in. But first of all, I really wanted to start with, can you tell us a bit more about, you told us a bit about your background, but a bit about your role at Hart Square?
Sure, yeah. So there's quite a few different elements to my role, which is why I quite enjoy it. But I'm effectively part of the practice management team. Kind of work a lot with our team of consultants. A lot of my my role is around looking into the technology partner market. So both working with people that we're already aware of, developing our existing relationships, making sure we know that what partners can do, what they're trying to develop, what they're trying to move into, giving them some honest feedback about things where we think they might either not be right or where they've maybe involved in things and we think they can possibly learn from some of the challenges they've faced. And also just speaking to new suppliers, people who are either we weren't aware of before, or they're maybe looking to enter the market and they're looking for a bit of guidance as to, we've got this great approach, we've got this thing that we think is quite unique. How would that work in an NFP sense? So we have a lot of those conversations, which are very kind of productive. There's an element of developing our services and our internal delivery methodology. So some of that's looking at new services, kind of research and development on things that we might look to introduce. For our existing services, we've got a set that, on the website that you can have a look at, but it's really about adapting them and making sure that we integrate what we learn from doing our projects, of which we do a lot. So we kind of pick up, we're always trying to kind of refine and develop and enhance the way that we do things, and share that knowledge amongst our team, which is a massive component of what we are as a practice. And I also sometimes get to deliver projects and kind of collaborate with the consultants on some of the kind of strategic projects, or sponsor them. So ultimately be the kind of accountable, kind of steer them at a leadership level, be a bit of a sounding board, and also kind of make sure that we're kind of delivering to the right level of quality. So yeah, it's quite varied, it's fair to say.
I think that explains why you're always so busy all the time.
Explains my diary, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what for you is the biggest challenge you find clients have when they're thinking about, embarking on an IT strategy?
I think the biggest challenge is really where to start. I think, there's generally, the triggers are, there's a feeling of kind of discord, a feeling of underperformance. There might be, sometimes it's, the relationship with kind of a tech partner is running to its end, or there's a natural kind of decision point around things. But I think there's just so many kind of questions floating around, are we the problem? Are there problems within the organization? Could we go to another partner and the same thing will reoccur? Even if we want to do something, what will we do first? What can we afford? Can we deal with the disruption? Is there the appetite to actually make a change? And quite often, when we talk about kind of technology, I think that there's a lot of challenge with senior leadership not being either engaged or particularly well informed around the possibilities. And there are often more glamorous, more showy projects that are kind of competing for the same budget. So I think it's about unpicking the problems methodically and really understanding what the picture is, and really trying to put in a kind of a positive case. I think the other two challenges I think are there's not really a great understanding sometimes of what good looks like. The problems are apparent, but in terms of what is possible, what would be a really good way to kind of manage our documents and our knowledge assets, and what would be a really good kind of desktop experience that would stop people from having that kind of efficiency task of jumping around between different environments. Should we, what's it like when all your technologies in the cloud? Is that good, or is that a fad? There's that kind of, we know we're probably not getting it right, but we're not sure what right is. And I think that's probably where you need to look externally and start looking at either kind of peers and partners to get a bit of insight on that. And I think that the last one that that is really that things are moving at a pace. I think the kind of the last few years have seen kind of adoptions and technologies at an incredible rate. Expectations of kind of audiences are getting more sophisticated. There's a lot of talk about kind of AI and kind of unstructured data use, where some people are still grappling with getting data in a structured format and doing some basic reporting. And the innovations are really kind of coming through thick and fast and getting normalized. Plus, particularly at the moment, cybersecurity is a big factor. I think someone said to me that there would be more cyber attacks in the first quarter of this year than there have been in the previous year, which is kind of I need to check that, but I think it's that kind of indicator of your cybersecurity needs to be high on the agenda. So the amount of change that's happening is intimidating, but that shouldn't be a reason to kind of go into your shell and kind of push it away. It's actually a reason to try and get onto the front foot with it. But I can understand why it's an intimidating area of work to commit to. So it's really about starting simple and trying to start with the kind of high level picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots and lots of insights there. And yeah, that cybersecurity one's really interesting. But I really like your point of having an understanding of what good looks like. I agree with you. Just loads of clients they just don't, and that's not their fault. That's just, you know, kind of, it is a common challenge. What are kind of key questions that you would, you know, you were saying that should be asked when developing an IT strategy? Now, obviously, I don't expect you to list all of them, but, you know, some of the key questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely areas that you want to dig into. I mean, it really does help if there is an idea of where the organization's going to, because that will help, you know, put you in a position as to, and what, you know, what area is IT going to play in that. But there's a kind of the practical questions around how suitable is the technology you've got now? Is it cost effective? Is it flexible? Is it, you know, is it on-site, off-site? Is that the right place for it to be? What are your, you know, some organizations have constraints in terms of almost their kind of their governance and things that they need, you know, different kind of levels of security they need to get to. How suitable is the team you've got in terms of skills, but also in terms of positioning, which I think is the one that's kind of underestimated or not thought about, is, you know, how well integrated are the people who do know, you know, about technology into some of the thinking that happens in a kind of a team and department level. You know, are you getting people into the right conversations so that there's more of a kind of a collaboration element to developing new ideas. What I think a big one is how across the organization, what's the kind of the training level, what's the kind of the organizational comfort and familiarity with technology? You know, do people feel empowered by it, or do they feel inhibited by it? Is it something they'll do out of necessity, or is it something where, you know, they've got to a good level of proficiency, and that means that they've got an idea of what they might like to do next, or the next challenge? Suppliers, you know, have you got the right ones? Have you got kind of relationships that are going to grow, or have they stagnated? And then it's the kind of the big ones around what can you afford? What's a realistic kind of budget for you to be looking at improving things? What are the benefits for that going to be? What are the risks of not doing it? So there's a full package of questions, which is why you kind of need to approach it in a kind of a structured way, so that you can, you know, you can see all sides of the problem and all sides of the opportunity before you actually kind of start saying with confidence what you're going to do first, what you're going to do next, what you're going to do after that.
Yeah, absolutely, makes perfect sense. Yeah, definitely when people start solutionizing first, it's like, don't, you know, do the process. It's definitely really worthwhile. Do you think an IT strategy can be carried out independent of any organizational sort of goals or strategy?
Ideally not. So I think if your kind of IT strategy or IT approach is out of sync with where your organization is going, you're going to hit problems. You know, I think if it's too siloed, then, you know, within this area of the organization, we think that we need to, you know, do this particular project, and we're kind of patting away some of the noises that are coming from other parts of the organization. You really need to bring a lot more people into the conversation. Even if there isn't a completely documented on your website strategy, or one that might be in, you know, development over the next few years, I think the most important thing to do is to get technology into the conversation, you know, to make it a subject of conversation at a senior level, and also at that more operational level. So even if you don't do anything else, I think it's probably it's more about that kind of relationship and engagement element to developing it, which I think is absolutely crucial. And equally, I think, you know, there is always going to be tactical things you can do about the day-to-day. I think, you know, there's so many organizations we see with kind of poor user desktops, you know, document management, bad equipment, communication tools that aren't quite right. If you know, you do see some situations where you're a bit like, you can see that like every single member of staff is working less efficiently because of what they've got in front of them, and then you realize that fixing some of those things will just amplify their performance. They will be, you know, they will not be copying but pasting as much because all the things are in the right place. So I think it's, you know, I think it's taking a kind of a benefits-led view of things and trying to bring that those elements are there alongside some of the initiatives that are happening within the organisation.
Perfect. Then staff may have, gripes or complaints around the systems they're using. So, how important is it to bring staff into the IT strategy review?
Fairly important, I'd say. I think it's a really interesting time at the moment because the, pandemic impact was really that there was a lot of change very quickly. The adaptation level for home working meant that a lot of new services and change was required, not optional, and there wasn't a lot of time to design services. There wasn't a lot of time to train. There weren't, a change management approach is very much about kind of nurturing people through that change, and that was almost like a shock. You've got these things, you now need to kind of take them on. And I think there's probably not enough credit given to a lot of kind of technology departments for how well they did to be able to react and put things in place and make it work. But I think what we're hearing from a lot of clients is that the kind of the user bases or organizations almost accepted the rough edges of some of those solutions for a period of time, because there was a level of recognition of, okay, there's been, we've had to make a quick change. We've had to do this in a kind of rough and ready way to transition from everybody being face to face to people working in teams, documents being in a certain location. There's probably a bit of a point now where people are saying, well, that was fine then, but what's the long-term plan? How's this actually going to come together? A lot of teams have probably organically said, well, we use Zoom, we use Teams, we use Google Hangouts. Are we actually going to start to reconcile this into a policy? Are we going to start to kind of like harmonize some of those different approaches and start to do things in a more consistent way? So it's really, I've from being in that head of tech role, of IT role, I remember how difficult it can be because of the tone of some of the feedback is not always very constructive. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the expectations are not always reasonable and well formed, and it's hard not. You've got to kind of be very mature and kind of put that to one side. But I think the value of getting alongside users and seeing what it's like. Sometimes just kind of literally going and sitting next to people and seeing how they work, or just try and get an idea of what their day's like, will give you an idea of what those almost very small barriers are, and how they amplify up to be, to the kind of the system and service level, and really to kind of get an idea of all those little benefits, all those things that you could unlock that could really change everybody in the organization, or kind of portions of the organization in a really positive way.
Brilliant, thank you. And I could definitely get asked this all the time. Is it worth carrying out business process review, alongside or part of an IT strategy?
I struggle to say no to doing a business process review, because I think they're great and I'm a very big advocate of them. I tend to find that more in kind of strategic systems implementations work is more the first step or an early step. And ultimately, I think if your organization doesn't have well-documented business processes, it should be in the roadmap somewhere. If you're looking at an IT strategy, I'd probably say it's not the first place I'd start. I think, as I said, one of the first, I think when we're looking at an organization strategy from a third party in a consultancy sense, what we're trying to do first is really understand the problem domain. Look at it from multiple different aspects in terms of processes, supplier, the operational, strategic approach, the technical issues, and then look at that in the round before we decide what you need is to do this. And it might be actually a business process review is going to be a very sensible thing to do, because you can start to pull out from business process review system issues, data issues, and some potentially kind of cultural and kind of internal issues in terms of efficiencies. But it's one possibility. I wouldn't say, oh, we're doing this, so therefore we're doing an IT strategy, therefore we'll do process review. I would hold your fire until you understand what the problems are. Yeah,
absolutely. Should your incumbent technology provider be involved in a strategy review?
It's a tricky one. I think we get this asked a lot. And I think only if you it depends on the relationship. It's only if you think there's a realistic possibility that you want to work with them in the long term. And I think sometimes it's because you feel like there's a reason that partner, particularly if it's a partner, you know, who are recognized to be underperforming, you know, if you think there's a reason that they've been blocked off from being able to be the best version of themselves, and you kind of trust them and you think they've got more to give, then possibly I would include them and have an open discussion with them. And we've definitely seen that, you know, where partners have basically been, they've had a very poor contract, they've had somebody giving them direction internally that's basically limited what they can do. There's a lot more they can do, they've just never been invited to do it. And sometimes that's a level of proactivity question. But you know, you need to have a sound reason that you think they're going to be competitive. But flip side to that is most of the partners into IT managed services that we speak to are basically working with the same components, and what the variation between them is their service level, how well designed their organization is, how competent their staff is, how good they understand the sector is a big factor for us. Their staff retention is massive because everybody's working on the same technologies. Organizations that don't look after their staff, they go somewhere else, because, you know, if they're an expert in Azure or, you know, kind of Google, then they'll go somewhere else because there's plenty of other places where they can apply those skills. So it's really unhelpful to have a look around and to evaluate some different options and to ask, you know, if you're thinking that your partner's not right, include them in a process, but look elsewhere, because, you know, you might see something from somebody else that really changes your perspective of what good is. You know, coming back to what good can be, that it may be elevated by looking around. And ultimately, if you include your partner and your existing partner, and they come back and kind of show you that they can do more and you can unlock more potential and build on a relationship, then fine. You've only learned more by looking around, and you've probably got a better price for it.
That's an excellent summary of that. Thank you. And then before we move on to the questions that come in, of which we have lots. So from your experience of the sector, are there any key tips that you would give to organizations thinking about embarking on an IT strategy review?
Yeah, I think get some help if you need it. I think, whether it's from organizations such as ourselves, or whether it's kind of working with kind of independent parties, there's other people who do similar things. But I think it is useful to kind of get outside your bubble a little bit and get some kind of independent views and some kind of views of organizations that have seen more different situations. I think to try and make the case for any change in terms of IT, non-technical and benefits led, I think that is really crucial to make sure that my biggest frustration with kind of IT and technology is sometimes the kind of blinding people with science. And I think that the job of people who work in that space is really to demystify it and see how some of the clever, actually technical things translate into tangible things that impact people in a very real, very kind of understandable way. So I think it's the job of people in there to try and make it accessible and see how technology can actually have a really positive impact. And the other things I was thinking about were, I think if you can use peer networks to kind of build your idea of what other people are doing, that's really, really helpful. There are more kind of conferences, both. I mean, I don't think they just need to be non-profit, because IT is occurring in kind of commercial spaces. So you can it's quite nice actually to go and see how other organizations, other kind of small, medium, or kind of large organizations are doing things, and to bring that back and say, well, can we do something like that? Is it particularly things like everybody has the same problems. Everybody's dealing with data. Everybody's dealing with documents coming in, and the need to kind of put them somewhere where they don't disappear into a quagmire, that they're actually kind of useful, tangible assets. Everybody needs to be able to be flexible, mobile, to be able to kind of use their workforce in an intelligent way, whether they're based in an office, in a hub, at home. The problems are quite universal. So kind of look around at what other people are doing and try and bring some of the best ideas back into your thoughts. And yeah, I think start looking at what the appetite for change is within your organization, both at a kind of a senior leadership level with your trustees. If I think they're speaking to them about what their thoughts are. Quite often there's sometimes a kind of a technology influenced trustees. Quite often somebody makes up part of the board, get their views, because the better aligned you can be with them, the more likely you are to have an advocate at that level. And also at a staff level, look who the early adopters and some of the advocates are, because building a network of people you can use as a sounding board, as people who will give you, if you say, oh, well, we're thinking of moving forward in this direction, and this is what we think the impact would be, can we just road check that idea and see how you think that might work with your team, your department? I mean, when you start doing that, you start building a kind of a network of people that will actually you can rely on to actually be even-handed about things and influence the people around them. So I think that's a really good kind of basis to start developing strategy to make it more transparent and more kind of integrated to the organization. They're not short, succinct tips, but they actually
they're very, very useful. So we have lots of questions. I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. But okay. One point, just to say that if for any that we don't cover, for anyone who's put any in as anonymous, if we don't get to answer it, if you want us to, just drop us a message or into Rebecca, and we can answer that separately, because I'm just conscious we have a lot and we might not get through them all. So one of the questions come in is, I think for us, we are hoping some of the things in the vision are going to be informed by the strategy rather than coming before. How do you get it the right way around? But I'm also kind of going to add in the second question around that, which is it okay to have multiple items within our vision? From the list of there's at least 5 of those that would be driving us, but does that confuse things? So can you have lots of things in your vision? And we were kind of, hoping that the strategy was then going to drive the vision, and how do you get it all the right way around? Thoughts? Putting you on the spot now.
I think it's okay to have multiple things in your vision. I don't think you're not targeting one of those. You're targeting a few. I mean, I think the way that I like to talk about a vision, particularly when we're kind of facilitating it in a meeting, is to talk about, it's almost like, imagine you're in that place, imagine you're in that organization that's working really well and is kind of has adopted things in the way you hoped. And should we just talk about what it'd be like to be, in your role as a director of marketing? What would be your life like? What would you be talking to your staff about? What would their day be like? When they kind of start work, wherever they start work, what would they see, what they do? And sometimes if you kind of try and get your head into what that organization is like, where you've liberated yourself from some of these things that you were holding you back, and you are now in a kind of a really kind of effective situation, you're not going to be able to describe that vision in one sentence. It's about trying to kind of condense it into a few kind of key statements that you can take out, you can share with people, and you can really kind of bring them into that same idea of where you'll go. But yeah, it's okay to kind of tackling multiple areas, because it's the problems are, or the things you're looking to get to are not simple. That you're looking to get to a new state that's got multiple good things going for it. So that's absolutely fine. The vision and the strategy and what you do is a forever chicken and egg thing. I don't think there is an absolutely ideal way of kind of getting to a perfect organization strategy and a perfect strategy. Very rarely does it happen that way. I think so it's really probably about trying to take the initiative and it's about getting good conversations on both sides, to be honest. I think if you can't get to the point where you've got a really clear direction from the organization, sometimes starting to talk about well, what are you looking for from technology, can actually start to stimulate some of the kind of possibilities at the strategic level. It's really not easy. And to be honest, we quite often, when we as Hart Square come into an organization that's in a kind of a context where one or the other is not quite in place, we might adapt our approach and kind of change the conversation based on whichever, from what's best to tackle first, and how do we kind of create the right conversations going forward.
Perfect, thank you. Next question, can you do a gap analysis if you're not an IT expert?
Yes, but it helps to have an experience of what the kind of the good looks like. So I think it's I think that if you're I mean, IT expert, IT professional will be able to hear conversations that are not technical and hear about situations, particularly when we work, because a lot of when we work with an organization, we're talking to users. We get kind of a sample of users to kind of complete surveys, and we'll quite often have focus groups, and quite often what the skill is in that is listening to what they're saying and inferring how that maps on to what you know to be the situation on the internal IT side. So there's that kind of aspect of saying, okay, I can hear you're all talking about the same thing. The same thing is this problem. You lack any standards in terms of how you manage documents. Nobody's ever written something down that says, if I have a document, it should be here, I should apply this information to it, and therefore somebody can find it again if I'm not at work today. And having experience of what those things that make up a good working functional kind of IT environment helps you discern what's going on when people are talking to you about the problems they're facing, and helps to group them. So I think it really helps to have some IT kind of expertise in how to organize IT. I think definitely helps that conversation.
Perfect. And kind of a follow-on question from that, really, is it essential to have a project manager that has a deep technical understanding of IT, or can it work having someone manage it because of their PM skills generally? So it's more on the project management side rather than the gap analysis side.
We at Hart Square have project managers who come from a non-technical background, and the reason that they can do their job as well as they can is because they're very good, they're very organized, they're very good at kind of facilitating conversations around technical things, while letting the technical people kind of do their thing, but making sure they get to clear project-oriented outcomes. So I don't think you don't need a super technical project manager. You need somebody who's kind of switched on enough to kind of understand, to have somebody come and be able to explain to them the situation that might have a technical aspect, but they don't need to be super technical themselves. And I think it's the if you've got the right kind of partners that you're working with, if one of my biggest frustrations is working with a client where I could see that every time that the kind of the relationship manager came to a meeting with the client, they would just say that, well, what kind of service do you want? What kind of switch do you want? And I was like, they don't know. They don't know. That you should be simplifying the questions you're asking them to be around, these are the options, these are the pros and cons, in a way that's accessible so they're empowered. By actually throwing technical stuff at them, you're disempowering them. You're actually giving them, you're actually making them think they're incompetent and they should know this, and they shouldn't. You should be simplifying it for them. So I think a good project manager will have the relationship skills to be able to turn around and say, I appreciate there's a lot of technical detail in what you're saying with it. Can you go away and bring me back some options in a way that doesn't include, some jargon, which is quite often the thing, which is the thing that's there to kind of, blind people rather than give them what they need. So and I'm quite a strong advocate of making sure that, people don't need to be super technical to have kind of IT conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I'm conscious of time. I'm going to kind of link two questions together. So there are so many solutions out there. How do you really know if it will work for you? Which also ties into a question around really how do you stay on top of, the ever-changing IT landscape and solutions that are out there?
That is a tough one. I mean, that's something we do as a, as a part of our roles. It's myself, my colleague Chris. We are constantly kind of scanning. It's quite often we gain the best ones from talking to organisations, and if we hear someone saying, "Oh, we heard of someone doing a good project in this particular area," we'll say, "Well, who are you speaking to? Can I kind of link up with them?" And then I'll go and talk to person within that organization that did a good project and ask them about it. And sometimes it's just taking the time to be inquisitive. And if you hear of somebody in your kind of LinkedIn network, if you hear of somebody in your kind of conference, if you hear, taking the time to kind of go to them and say, "So what were you doing? What were you trying to do? What did you use? How did it work?" And yeah, it takes time, but it's really worth it. I mean, I think sometimes the kind of the conferences that do come up and the events do help kind of shortcut some of that. You can kind of see quite a lot in quite a short time and get a bit of a download of where things are now. Equally, there's quite a lot, some of the non-profit focused technology content that's put out there. We put out a lot of content that you might be interested in, that is also worth kind of keeping on top of. So I think a lot of it is about isolating the time to be able to have the conversations, to make the time for sticking your head outside of your organisation bubble and actually going and either reading or attending things. It's not easy, I suppose, is the short answer. It's not. It doesn't come without work, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think there's another question coming, which I'll kind of just sort of tag on, but I'll give a quick 2-second view on it, because I want to get one other question in before we finish, which was around, how do you know you're getting good advice if you're not an IT expert? And I think that ties into what exactly you've just been saying. And for me, it's that point about talk to people that have used either the organization or where you're getting that advice from. Talk to the market, talk to the sector. The same as keeping on top of it. I think it's really important. But the question I did want to ask you is, given the speed of change in this area, how often do you need to review a strategy?
That's a good one, isn't it?
Good one to end on.
I think, but a lot of strategy, or a good strategy, will build in some kind of tracking measures for whether it's actually performing or not. So I think, it's actually, I think any strategy that we'd be talking about or recommending would include some kind of proactive network that engages with your with a user base, whether it's a kind of a set of user groups that meet on a regular basis, kind of interaction with kind of line managers across an organization, a regular kind of engagement with senior leadership, regular kind of satisfaction surveys amongst your kind of either internal or external audiences. You need to put the kind of the channels and the mechanisms to understand whether things are actually working for people, and then use that as a, as much as you can, get a combination of kind of quantitative things that you can kind of keep an eye on, and a kind of qualitative, take the time to kind of take the feedback, so you can get an idea of doing a regular review of, how are we doing better, worse, or about where we thought we were going to be in terms of the experience that people are having. So I think it's really about kind of monitoring it on an ongoing basis. I think, sometimes, strategy happens on a cyclical basis when it follows an organization strategy. Sometimes it can be just a case of, doing an annual review and trying to do more of an incremental approach to developing a strategy. Can be a much more kind of positive thing, because you actually put in the milestones at which you'll take the time to reflect on whether things are working or not, and then expect to do kind of a reappraisal and a reflection exercise, rather than doing that every 3-5 years, which I think is probably a little bit healthier. So yeah, I think getting the feedback channels and listening to those, it might, because some of those might trigger you sooner to think, actually, what we've put in place is not working the way we thought it is, so we might have to change direction, we might have to do something different. That the benefit. I talk a lot about benefits because a lot of it is about recognizing whether there's a cause and effect between the thing you've done and the benefit you're hoping to get. And if you're looking at the benefit and it's not happening, then you need to question whether you've actually got the right kind of project output aspects of your strategy and whether you need to kind of reevaluate them.
Perfect. We have so many other questions that we don't have time to get through. But as I say, if any of the ones that we haven't, please reach out and we will respond to them offline. And there's a few, and I was thinking, could I get another quick one in? But there's no ones that could be just a one sentence answer, unfortunately. So I just want to say, Rhys, thank you so much. That has been brilliant. So many insights, and it's great to see so many questions coming in. So showing that it's definitely resonating with people, and also that there is a lot of challenges. But I think it's really to say, sorting out from the start, what is it you're trying to do? I like that expression, understanding what good looks like, and do it in a logical way and involve people. I think there, of the many takeaways, there are just sort of one or two of them. So just to say thank you very much for you all joining us today and for all your fantastic questions. Sorry we didn't get to cover them all. And thank you again, Rhys, for joining us. I'll now let you get back to your very busy day in your diary.
Thank you, Jo.
Thank you.